Are we gonna bounce ball?
Yes.
Hi.
We live?
Yeah.
All right. We are live. That is a big day, big moment. It's April 5th. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Kubernetes Meet Our Contributors. It has been a while for us. So we are back in 2021, and we are here to serve the same content that we always do, which is mentoring on demand. What does that mean? That means we have a bunch of upstream contributors here, upstream meaning closest to the maintainer, and we all help out folks who want to either contribute upstream, continue upstream, or are on their journey to be a maintainer. So who is that? That's everyone in the Kubernetes ecosystem that's interested in contributing code, docs, process policy, or some kind of community thing. Who am I? My name is Paris Pittman. I work here. I work on the steering committee as well as contributor experience. And kicker with contributor experience is we have a contributor experience takeover today. So all of the people, all of our panelists today are with contributor experience as well as other SIGs. And a SIG for folks who are like, what the heck is she talking about? Is a special interest group, and special interest groups with Kubernetes own code, as well as docs, process, and policy. So to start things off, what we always do is we do a round of introductions, and then we'll do a round of instructions. Instructions meaning how to interact with us. So first things first, I'll go around and I'll call on y'all. If you could give a brief introduction about yourselves, and it doesn't necessarily need to be 30 seconds. Tell us about how you came to the project. Tell us where you're contributing now, etc. First person that I see in my screen is Josh Burkus. Hello, Josh. How are you?
Hey there. I'm Josh Burkus. I work on SIG contributor experience. I also work a lot with the CNCF on CNCF projects advancing within the CNCF. And I work for Red Hat.
And you forgot about like all the time you did with release.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. Right, that's true. I was part of the whole release team thing. So if you actually have questions about joining the release team, about how releases happen, about upcoming changes we're planning to the release process, those are things I can field.
And George, which y'all, this is a special moment for us because George used to be our streamer. So George is a guest. George,
now I'm emeritus.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm George Castro. I did Kubernetes for a few years with all these fine folks, and then for the past few months, I've been doing stuff for Kubeflow and learning a lot.
Yes.
Here to come back and say hello, see how everyone's doing.
Yeah.
All the stuff I'm stealing.
And it's so cool because our community is so large that so many people come here, do a lot of work, and take the learnings out. And George is an awesome example of that with Kubeflow. Nabarun, want to give an intro really quick?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Nabarun. I am from India. I am the Kubernetes release lead for Kubernetes 1.21, which is going to be hopefully released in 3 days. Lots of exciting stuff coming up. I have been involved with contributor experience, API machinery, and a few other sub-projects like enhancements. So feel free to ask me anything related to that, and I would be happy to answer you those questions. Thanks, Paris, for hosting this.
No, thank you for joining. We have a lot of time zones representing right now, and the 8:30 a.m. Pacific time won for Meet Our Contributors, y'all. So I guess everybody likes to eat their pancakes with us if you're on the Pacific Coast, or if you are in India like Nabarun, then you're probably having a late night snack right now with us. Whatever meal you're having or not, enjoy. This is a casual session. Allison, I don't know if you can come on for a wave, but Allison is our new streamer. And if she can, she'll wave. She's also a new chair of contributor experience. If she can't, but let's just wave at her.
This new setup is awesome.
I know this new setup is awesome, and Allison hooked us up. So Allison and Bob, thanks a lot. Oh, there she is. She's coming on to wave. Hey, thanks, Allison.
No worries. I'll see y'all around. I gotta go.
We have London, Portland, San Francisco, India, and Michigan.
All right, so now the instructions. Now we're at the good part. You're like, all right, I've heard enough. I'm done. What do I do now? So you're like, hey, I've got a lot of questions to ask. Questions can range from where do I get started to I'm already on the project and I'm having an issue with XYZ. What does this mean? What is a SIG? I mean, really anything above, anything upstream is totally cool with us. So first question always comes from either my DMs. So if you would like to stay private, you can feel free to direct message me on the Kubernetes Slack. My name is Paris there, just Paris. You'll find me. Or you can ask them in the Slack channel that says Meet Our Contributors. You can ask them there in public. If you ask them there, then other contributors might see them and answer your question. We can also do code-based tours in some cases, depending on the repo. So if you have things that you would like for us to explain, we can dang near try. And our first question is in my DMs, and it's, how did you all get started with your first contribution to Kubernetes?
Well, like a lot of other people, my first contribution was a documentation contribution, which was, as I recall, when I was first trying to set up Kubernetes, this is pre 1.0, there was no documentation on what ports needed to be open on the network for Kubernetes nodes to talk to each other.
And so that's because you were looking for that, right?
I was setting up Kubernetes for the first time, right? And I was on a lockdown network, and I was like, I can't just leave all ports open between these. That's forbidden by corporate network policy. And therefore, I need to know exactly which ports need to be open. And that ended up being a bit of a thing because it turned out that not only was that not documented, it wasn't documented because literally nobody knew the answer. Because that ties into what plugin network you're doing. And so gradually with the help of this, I ended up involving other people so that we could do that little table that's now in the docs that has if you're using this network, you need these ports.
How's the doc process now compared to then for contributions?
There's a little bit more to it. They've actually separated out, your sort of editorial and technical, et cetera, reviews for the docs, which was all kind of one check, or honestly, there wasn't much of a check. When I was doing it there.
Checks are good.
Yeah.
We've learned that reviews are good. Double reviews are good.
Yeah.
George or Nabarun, what about your first one?
Docs for me. I was working on Ubuntu at the time, and that section needed to be fixed. So that was my first submission. And then the first thing I learned was I should have gone to a docs meeting before I did that PR because they're in the middle of doing a transition. So Jared was like, hey, dude, you got to rewrite all your slug, that slug data in the top page. He was like, we're changing that. Sorry. I was like, oh, well, I should have asked the question first. So
you learn to ask before you do a big PR.
Yeah, don't show up with something. Talk to
Okay.
someone first before you even open a text editor. For sure. Yeah.
And then Nabarun.
For me, it was helping out in the Contributor Summit and helping out with the Kubernetes Python client. If I remember correctly, those were the first two places that I started getting involved, and then eventually got involved with the release team as a shadow, and then the rest is
History.
Oh yeah.
So what kind of stuff are you working on right now? So what's your week look like for contributing to Kubernetes this week on Monday, April 5th on?
So this week is a bit special because in 3 days we are going to have the Kubernetes 1.21 release. So this week is going to look like I'm checking the milestone every few hours and checking the test grid, whether things are running correctly, if CI jobs are running fine. So to give the audience a bit context on what test grid is, so the Kubernetes community runs a set of tests be it unit tests, be it integration tests, or be it conformance tests. And everything is presented in a cool dashboard, which you can see by going to testgrid.ktest.io. I'll also paste in the link to the Slack channel later on. So during part of the release, we check whether the tests are passing or not. If the jobs are not passing, we usually try to debug why they are failing. And if we can find a solid signal on why they're failing and fix it on time, we are on time for the release. But on very special circumstances, we may even decide to maybe postpone a day or two. So that is how my week is going to look like, at least this one.
How is 121 looking in terms of test passing? I haven't looked at test grid this morning.
That is a good question.
Yeah. So the blocking ones are okay, I would say. Nothing is red. Some tests are purple right now, which basically is like something is timing out, but intermittently we don't have any pattern as such. On informing boards, we do have a few failures, mostly on Windows side and cluster API, AWS side of things. The team is onto it. As I know, there are flake issues open, and since they're on informing, we are trying to fix it, but on a best effort basis. Thanks, Josh, for putting in the link.
Can people help you at this point, or no? It's kind of too late to jump in.
Well, yes, people can help in any time. So if they see, so people who understand what test grid is, they can come in and see for patterns on how tests are failing. And if they know of patterns, they can just file an issue that, hey, this is failing at such and such intervals. You should probably have a look at it. So if you really want to help us in especially this part of the release, please do ping us on release-ci-signal Slack channel on the Kubernetes Slack. That is where the CI signal team hangs out.
And then, Josh, you've mentioned that you used to work with the release team and that you're an emeritus lead. What does that mean as, what does emeritus mean with the project? And if I see that title, like emeritus lead, what does that mean exactly? What kind of support do you give the release team?
Not much anymore, because the release team's kind of special in that a couple of years ago, we set up the release team to be a training machine as well as making releases. So we actually have a lot of emeritus leads. Early on, after I became a former release lead, what would happen is I and Steven and Tim and some of the other former leads would come back, and we would be the private advisor to whoever was the current lead. Just because we really try hard to document everything you have to do for a release, but there's always stuff that you miss. And so it's helpful to have somebody who went through it to say, oh crap, that's not in the documentation. You need to remember to do this week. Or to provide a sounding board if they have a particularly thorny problem, right? If you have a section lead, if you have for example, the person leading enhancements, and they're, say, offending the SIG leads because they're being very abrupt, what the release lead should do about it. It can be really helpful for them to talk to somebody who's had experiences managing the people. But I haven't done that in over a year because, like I said, at this point we have, I don't know, 8 or 9 different emeritus leads. So plenty of folks to rotate through. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. No, it's nice. It worked, right? It worked. The whole goal was to have rotation and to not have anybody who was in the situation that a lot of us were in early on, where we had to be a release lead no matter how inconvenient it was to our professional schedules, or Kubernetes did not get released, right? Because I remember, my period as release lead was definitely not the ideal quarter to do it, and resulted in some 100-hour weeks because I had major deadlines for Red Hat at the same time that we had, code freeze happening.
100-hour weeks, boo, George.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
I wanted to add in that this is absolutely the way to do it. and all open source projects should do this. The fact that SIG release is kind of decoupled from the release team that allows like a single thread of continuity all the way down. And that wasn't obvious to me until I was involved with a project that didn't have that. And I found myself going, I need to find an emeritus lead that's bored or somebody to like help me out. Like the skills that you're learning. And I've done a few release team things as both a shadow and as a lead. And now in hindsight, I'm sitting there thinking all projects should strive to have, you know, you're more making shadows than you are, you know, doing that stuff. And everything from like, you have to be a shadow first, then you can become a lead, to rotating out people in emeritus and then maybe they cycle back in or whatever. That whole thing should be copy and pasted everywhere because it just works. It just works so well. I can't tell you the amount of times I was like, man, I need a Tim for like 10 minutes. And I could cover every Tim, right? Like,
right.
You know what I mean? So yeah, I'm finding myself, and then the weird thing is I was like, okay, I know release has done this before. So I went and looked at all the playbooks, and the playbooks now are at such a point. It's like a manual. It's not like before it was like a little checklist, you know, it's like, hey, 3 weeks out, make sure to send the mail to some list or whatever. Now it's like, there's like a whole introduction on the intent, like what your mindset should be in. It's just this whole entire guidebook thing. And I was like, this is fantastic. And then I found the other problem, which is like, oh no, this is a bit too much. So I'm also finding ways to adapt that into exactly what works for us, you know, and then like handing that to people who might be doing this in the future. But I think the way y'all set it up initially with, you know, you're having a release team who cares about the release and only that release, but at the same time, someone who cares about the long-term goals of that SIG, 100%, absolutely the best way to do it. Like, it's obvious to me how well it works now that I was too close before, you know?
So you're saying that shadow roles are awesome.
Shadow roles, doing applications, right? Because I know part of the problems in open source is like, hi, I want to volunteer, and then you know, and then half the people bail, and then the people who are left got to do 3 times as much work, and then that leads to burnout. We've seen this how many times? Over and over and over again, right? Having an application process, know that person has skin in the game. Like, they're like, no, I'm going to commit to this, and I have to prove to you that I'm going to commit to this. And then there's this kind of culture of like, all right, it's my turn to be a shadow. Sure, I don't know anything about a lot of the stuff that you all are about to teach me, but I can commit to showing up for X hours, you know, a week or whatever it is, right? To at least try to get it. And even if I fail at figuring out the technology stuff, which I frequently do, I can at least be there for someone when they need something done. You know what I'm saying? Even if you're struggling, if you're committed, you know what I'm saying? Like, you can still kind of find a place to be useful, I guess. Whereas before it was like, I need volunteers. You get 10 volunteers, 9 bail, and the last poor person who was left wants to quit the project in 3 months, right? So like this whole kind of forced, you know, and then not putting anyone in a position to lead something until they've figured out to be a shadow first, right? Like at first, that's a neat idea, right? But then now, as I look back on it, I was like, man, that was actually that's like a crucial step of the process if you think about it. And then when you don't have those things, it's like, oh, okay. Having that very close to the release when there was that not postmortem. What's the word? Is that the word?
Retro.
Yeah, retro.
Yeah, retro. Right after the release to feed immediately back into that. I remember those being very detailed and kind of understanding, oh, okay, that's just that's just what SRE and DevOps people do, right? But now as I'm going, because now I need all the tips, so I'm going through all the old retros. I've literally watched them all. I started at 1.10 and made my way forward, and I'm starting to pick up on all the little things that you didn't think were important.
I'm
But
glad
you
we're all
don't have
working
one
from
anymore.
home. I would
That's a
be like,
great idea.
George, stop.
Yeah.
But
It's all good.
George needs a
do we
hug.
want to? Do we want to take Maria's question?
Yes, yeah, no,
Here, yeah.
there's actually quite a few questions in my DMs
Okay,
as
cool.
well. So,
Yeah. Sorry.
no, that was all amazing
Lisa's so good.
information. So we actually have another question too in my DMs that's sort of similar to Maria's as well. But Maria in chat, y'all, is looking for some help getting started, specifically contributing code, and what do they need to know and do first? Some of the replies, of course, included reading the contributor guide. Would anybody like to elaborate?
Well, there's going to be, I mean, the contributing guide is useful, particularly because there's a bunch of prerequisites. Like, if you haven't contributed to Kubernetes before, you're going to need to sign the CNCF CLA, or have your employer sign it if they haven't already. And I know that can be a hurdle for people to get started. And then take a look at the contributing guide, which has a lot of detail. Hold on, let me get a link for that. The other thing that we actually go through all the time for this is is as much as possible, if you already know what it is you want to do code-wise, what you want to work on, right? You're a networking geek and you want to work on network, you have a particular bug fix you want to get, whatever, then find out what SIG owns that area, because that's who you're going to be dealing with for review and approval of your work. And getting started with them will avoid long delays while you wait for a response. So like if it's going to be about networking, it's probably going to be SIG network. If it's a security issue, it's probably going to be SIG security, but it might not be, right? Because if it's a security issue with a kubelet, you're going to actually end up talking to SIG node. And the sort of map of areas of responsibility can be confusing. So one of the things that we tell people they can come to contributor experience for is, hey, I need to work on this. I don't know what SIG it is. And so you can come to the SIG Contribex channel or mailing list and ask, and we will help you figure out which SIG it is you need to talk to for the area you want to work on.
And what about George or Nabarun? What do you say when folks ask you this question? Because trust me, I feel like we get this question a lot.
So I usually say that if you're using Kubernetes in some capacity, maybe at work or like trying out personally, try to find your own vice, like one thing that you don't like in Kubernetes or things that annoy you. And probably if they're in the roadmap, then you can start contributing to those parts of the puzzle. Then it's just about like you need to find which SIG owns that area of code and just showing up in the meetings, showing up on Slack, just being there that, hey, here's an issue I face. Do you think this is legit? If yes, can I solve it? And people would be willing to help you. The beauty of this community is nobody denies help. Like there will always be people who would be willing to help you if things are in the roadmap. So I really like that part of the community.
And then George, I guarantee you have another way too. I have like 8 other ways in my head right now. So give me one of them.
Find a buddy. Find someone who's maybe either closely, like either works in the same company or maybe is in the same country as you, or you go to the same meetup or something like that around your skill level, or maybe a little bit where you want to strive to be, and then to ask them how to do it.
I totally agree. I think mine is probably a combo of all of them, where my first interaction with Kubernetes, I looked at all of the community groups that we have. So that's SIGs and working groups and user groups. I looked and I shortlisted the SIGs that A, I have interest in, and B, my employer would have interest in, came together, and that's what kind of gave me the, okay, I'm going to start to be a fly on the wall on these mailing lists, on these repositories, The cool thing about the community groups is it is a map to the rest of the world within Kubernetes, and inside of their charters is where is the code that they own. So it's kind of like a little bit of breadcrumbs. It's sort of being like an investigator. You're investigating where you want to spend your time with the project because the project is extremely large. So, and yes, everybody uses help wanted issues, good first issue, and things like that. I usually tell people that's not the wisest to jump in and like start contributing, because I think a lot of people go to Kubernetes right off the bat, look for a help wanted issue, and then go, oh my gosh, what is this? So it's actually way better, in my opinion, when you know a little bit about the backbone of the project before you start hitting the ground running in that way. That's just my opinion, and we're all here to give ours. So the next question is in my DMs, and someone was just super curious to know about the composition of the contributors, meaning, are folks full-time? Do folks have like a full-time like employer title that says Kubernetes contributor? Are there independents here? Do people do this as a hobby? What do you all think about the composition of the contributor community here?
Actually, we have stats, as you know, having been the processor of other years of the contributor survey. As a matter of fact, and honestly, like all other open source projects, you have this curve, right, where it's a minority of the community who are being paid by employers to hack on Kubernetes particularly. But that minority group does the majority of the actual contributions, right? Because they have more time to work on it than anyone else does. But we have everything from, like, if you look at, we talk about the thousands of contributors that we have, and I don't know what the current number is. And at any given time, the majority of those thousands of contributors are honestly people who contributed one fix. And it may feel like if you're contributing a single fix that it's not that important, but if you look at the number of people contributed single fixes, we would need like an additional couple dozen full-time contributors to cover all the contributions from those people. You know, collectively, it makes a huge difference. And I will actually look at the current survey.
Yeah, it was like it was over 50,000 last I checked. I think that might be a few months old of the drive-bys. And all I'm going to add to Josh's while he looks that up is having the governance have the inclusivity built in, I think, is really beneficial as well. We like state that,
Yeah,
you know, that's important to us, and I think that really helps, even though I don't know how we measure that.
Yeah, there's 50,000 contributors. I can say with a fact that 90% of them don't do this full time. 90% of them don't do this full time. However, 10%, that's still 10% of 50,000. That's still a humongous amount. And I would bet that some of those people have something to do in their jobs. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're pushing code all the time. Maybe it means they filed an issue this year. But I would say about 10% of those people have something to do with their job involved. And then I would say maybe 1% of those probably contribute 50% or more. If I'm a Vegas bettor. Nabarun, what about your experience with release team compared to other SIGs? Because I know other SIGs, like the larger groups like network and API machinery, are powered with a lot of full-time contributors. What's the release team makeup look like for like hobbyists versus people who are like coming into the project to commit? What's that look like?
So speaking personally, until like December of 2020, I used to contribute to Kubernetes as a hobby, but since then I am doing it like as part of my job. So it's a bit easier when you're doing it as part of your job, because now like I'm spending that 8 to 10 hours of my day at work also contributing. And speaking of the current, the structure of the current Kubernetes release team, we have a really good mix this time, as in we have a lot of students. And it felt great when we chose the team. and we came up with the final team. We were like, hey, this is like really great. If students are also being interested in Kubernetes and being involved with a program like the release team shadow program, which serves as a really good stepping stone into the community, we have like really good hobbyists in some time, or maybe they can also contribute to Kubernetes as a full-time job maybe later on. So that's how the current release team looks like. We don't have any concrete stats, as in like how many people contribute as part of their hobby and how many people do it as part of their day job. So I really like can't answer that question. Maybe DevStats can give some data, like if people have signed an independent CLA or they don't mention their company in Git DM, maybe.
Yeah, unfortunately, the CNCF does not release stats on CLA signings. So we don't actually have access to that data. Although, wait, we do have attribution by company, which, with its caveats, right? Because tracking people's real world changes, right, of who's employed by who, and also just because somebody's employed by a company and they're contributing to Kubernetes doesn't mean they're employed to contribute to Kubernetes. Even sometimes with companies that are that use Kubernetes on the job, that person's role they might be contributing on their own still. Can be a little hard to tell. So the
well, that kind of leads into the next question, if you're cool with that. The next question is, how do I get my employer to care? How can they get their employer? How can they convince their manager to say, hey, I don't necessarily want to do this full time or even part time, but I would love to have some support on our time, like on our 40 hours a week, to do either a few PRs, issues, or help out the community in some way. So like, hey, let's sign a CCLA, a corporate CLA. Like, how could you convince like your employer to support?
Well, I would say, first of all, it's going to depend on whether or not your employer is using or planning to migrate to Kubernetes. If they're not using or planning to migrate to Kubernetes, then it's hard to make a case. The only case you'd be making then is that, say, if you're contributing code, that it's improving your Go code. If you're contributing documentation, that it's improving your skills in developing team documentation, because we have a terrific documentation team with a whole lot of systems that I know a lot of companies internally wish they had. Then that's the case that you're making, right? If your company's not invested in Kubernetes. And in that case, I would say expect to only get a very limited amount of time, of work time, to contribute. If your company is invested in Kubernetes, if they're using it on there, it's a lot easier to make a case that it reduces risk for your company to have somebody on staff who understands the upstream code, even if you're using a commercial distribution. And one of the ways to make that obvious to your boss, I found, because I did this a lot as a consultant, is to feed them information about what's coming in Kubernetes, that if you're hanging around a lot of the community, you're going to hear. And then because that will make it obvious, if you can say, hey, by the way, when we upgrade to 1.2.1, we're going to have to prepare by changing this thing, something they wouldn't necessarily have heard from their commercial vendor yet, right? And so providing that advanced information makes it obvious how you're there reducing risk. The other thing, obviously, you can do is attack bugs that have specifically affected your own usage, right? Because for a lot of Kubernetes vendors, I can speak for Red Hat. I can't necessarily speak for those, but for a lot of Kubernetes vendors, 80% of our distribution is just upstream Kubernetes. So if we want to fix a bug, we fix it in Kubernetes, not just in our product. And for that reason, if you have a bug that affects you maybe more than the other customers for your vendor, you can get it fixed faster if you fix it yourself. And that's also a good case to make to your boss.
George or Nabarun, what about y'all?
You go first, Amber.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go.
Okay. So when Josh mentioned this example, right, I just remembered what happened in my previous job. So when contributing to Kubernetes, I had a better context with respect to how the code is structured and how can I find what I need to as part of my job, because we used to use Kubernetes. Now, once so happened that we used to use cron jobs really heavily. Now, there are some certain caveats in the cron jobs as well. Like there are some cases which are like no operations and they are yet to be fixed or they are yet to be like graduated. So those kind of situations really help you in understanding, like, because you won't encounter the bug when it goes to production. You will encounter that, hey, I know that it's not a bug. It's just an incomplete feature. It's not done yet. So I can do something about it ahead in time, which essentially saves business value. And I feel like that is a really great point in making, like convincing your boss to be, to give you time to contribute to Kubernetes.
That was a good one. I liked that. I liked the good example. George, what about you?
Time box me to 30 seconds. You have to make the business case. And as Josh was talking about it, is if you're in the field and maybe your product is based on Kubernetes or built on Kubernetes, when we're talking about infrastructure, customers are generally smart, right? They're not looking for, give me the cheapest way to set up a blog on the web, right? This is their infrastructure, right? So in a way, you're not only making the technical arguments like Josh is talking about, but the business arguments as well of the people that are working on the thing along with the product, right? I'm not just selling you that I have a Kubernetes-based thing. I'm telling you that this team understands how upstream works and understands how everything is put together so that when you as a customer has a problem and I fix it, I can get that back up into the project and help them understand why that is more important. And that's just as important as like, I pay you money and then you give me a product, right? So for me, it's about selling the process back as a business value and not just like a software thing.
Actually, I want to add one more business argument that you can make to your boss. If your company is, say, migrating to adopting to some distribution of Kubernetes for your own internal infrastructure, you are almost certainly hiring people with Kubernetes experience. And the best way for you to find additional people with Kubernetes experience is the Kubernetes community. And therefore, having somebody on staff who is spending a bunch of time there means that they can forward people recommendations to your HR to hire people.
All right, y'all. FYI, I have 2 questions left. This is a last call for questions. If you're out there listening and you're just joining us, this is Kubernetes Meet Our Contributors. I am Paris, the moderator, with a panelist of awesome people here that contribute upstream. If you have any questions, again, last call for questions, go to Meet Our Contributors in Slack or DM me. So speaking of arguments, not necessarily in this context, but we have a contributor who has some questions around consensus and building consensus and lazy consensus. And they're saying that, excuse me, y'all. They're saying that in their current environment right now, in their current dev environment at their work, they either own a thing themselves, meaning they're the responsible individual, or it's some kind of team initiative, or there's a direction or a directive, or they vote. But they're coming here to do upstream work, and they can see that there's clearly people here who are doing some kind of consensus building and things like that. So how does consensus building work with this project, especially when it comes to technical decisions? And if you'd like compare it to, maybe the situation which I just gave, which is somebody's coming from an environment that's not necessarily the case. So just talk about either your experiences or just, a little bit about consensus in general. George, you were just head bobbing, so I'm thinking you're coming off mute.
No, I was grabbing caffeine. I wish I had an answer for you that isn't just like watch Tim Hawking. Like, I don't really have. I was hoping Josh or Navarun would have better information there.
I just have 2 words: lazy consensus.
So describe what lazy consensus means, maybe for folks who are used to like not having lazy consensus in this environment.
Sure. So what we most of the time do in the Kubernetes community is, since the community is so much distributed and you can't really have everyone sitting at the same place talking about the decision and discussing the topic, which is up for discussion, what you do is you gather a set of points, and then what you can do is set up send a mail to the mailing list which concerns that part of the decision, or maybe to KDev if it's like a community Kubernetes dev @googlegroups.com, which is our general mailing list for every Kubernetes developer. If you have a community-wide decision, you send there, and then you set a time which is far enough in the future, but not like long enough in the future. Maybe let's say 10 days or 14 days. It depends. There is no ballpark figure as to what should be the ideal figure. And then you basically...
It can depend on what else is going on, right? Because if you set a lazy consensus period, but the middle of it is KubeCon, then you'll get people complaining that they haven't had time to even look at it.
Yes.
Well, so who makes this final call though in lazy consensus? Like, who would it like? How does that work? Like, okay, so you put out this idea, and then what? People just say yes and no. Like, who are the people that say yes and no?
So just go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was just going to say that usually like there is a provisional decision, and there are like requests for commits on that decision. And if somebody strongly disagrees, if there is a disagreement, then obviously there is a discussion on the mailing list. And it has happened a lot of times. We do a lot of, if anyone who is listening goes to the Kubernetes dev Google group and search for lazy consensus, they will probably find a lot of threads as live examples of how we do it. Josh, if you have more points.
Yeah. I mean, usually what happens is you're going to come and you're going to say, hey, I'm going to do X. I mean, the general lazy consensus is, hey, we have this problem. This is our solution for the problem. And we're putting it out here because it affects a lot of people. Like say we're putting on Kubernetes dev because it affects a lot of people who are not in our SIG. Or, in your case, hey, I've been working on this privately and I need to send it to the SIG. And effectively what you're saying with the lazy consensus decision is object if you're gonna, right? Because in most things, ultimately, the solution that somebody's working on is automatically superior to any theoretical solution that nobody is working on. And therefore, you're really looking for people who are going to say, hey, this is broken, and this is what it is going to, these are the problems it's going to cause, right? Things that you had not thought of when you devised the solution that would be like, say, secondary effects. A good example of this is we're currently going through this. When you have a really big thing that's going to affect a lot of people, you do creating what's called a KEP, Kubernetes Enhancement Process, procedure, proposal. And that is simply a really long written version of the lazy consensus, proposal with all of the details in it, right? And we're going over one to move from 4 releases a year to 3 releases a year. And so like Stephen put this up and I put in there and I said, well, there's actually this thing about the current release process that is already broken, but will become more broken with 3 releases a year. And therefore, as a follow-on to this KEP, we're going to need to address that. And that's kind of what you're looking for.
Did we say what a KEP is? I don't know if we've spelled it out for folks who are like, what's a KEP?
Yeah, well, like I said, it's a really long, detailed version of, hey, I'm going to make this big change, and that change can be technical or it can be non-technical. that will potentially affect multiple areas or affect users, right? The majority of the KEPs are, here is a named feature that is going to affect users. Like, we're going to kill off cronjobs v1 and we're going to replace it with cronjobs v2, and cronjobs v2 will have these features. And here's the list of releases in which we expect to implement these features, and here's the expected depreciation schedule, and here's whose stuff that's going to break. And so that's what goes into a KEP. Same thing with, a KEP that's non-technical, like the change to the release schedule, right? Here's all of the things that I can think of that it is going to affect.
Perfect. George, any comments about consensus before we wrap it up?
The Apache project has a great page on this, and I actually bought lazykonsents.us to just point to that page, and I tweeted it. So I don't know if we can send a URL, but just look for Apache Software Foundation, Lazy Consensus in Google, and you'll end up there eventually.
Oh my gosh. And Nabarun just in chat linked us to a Is My Thing an Enhancement? And I've never read this, and it is great. So
I'm gonna go check that out.
It's what an enhancement is, what an enhancement is not. And I think that's awesome. So congrats to the dot crew there for helping out with that one. That's really great.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
And I think that's it for us. I don't have any other questions, and I don't see anything else in chat. So what we usually do is we always go out on a high note of, if there's one thing that you could tell to Kubernetes contributors that's on your mind right now, that you wish you had a microphone for, because guess what? You do right now. What's one thing that you'd like all Kubernetes contributors to know? Now, Barun, I have a feeling yours is going to be release related, so you go first.
I don't know, like in what context should I answer this?
It could be any context. It could be get your tests in. It could be anything like that.
One thing that I would like to say is, like, I think George already covered it, but it's more like create a pull request and commit as early and as often as possible. Like, you may not tag a reviewer or approver because you may feel that it's incomplete, but then do push early so that at least people who are willing to review your code can do it as soon as possible, and you get as early reviews as possible. This is really helpful in the community. Even if you're not targeting is the current release, even if you are like creating a PR just for the next release, it helps everyone in the community to do it. So that is what came to my mind at first.
That's a good one.
Yep.
Josh, what about you?
I would say be patient. Non-response is not a rejection. I don't know how many issues and PRs we get a week, but the primary reason why you don't get a response to something is that nobody's actually read it. And don't assume that if you don't get a response that your proposal is being rejected. Instead, maybe find out what SIG it's going to be under, attend the next SIG meeting if you reasonably can with your time zone, otherwise use their mailing list. And, after a reasonable interval, give people time to respond. After a reasonable interval, post and say, hey, I just posted this PR. If anybody could review it, that would be wonderful.
And George, your microphone tip.
Just show up and be yourself. It's a stressful time for everyone. People are struggling, and sometimes you just need to just kind of hang out with people around something that you care about. I've had meetings where someone's like, hey, can we just kick off and can I rant to you for 20 minutes? Absolutely. Whatever, we're all a team here. So show up.
Yes. And one of those meetings you can show up, like Josh mentioned very early in the beginning of the call, is contributor experience. Contributor experience meets weekly, once on Slack, the next week on Zoom. So you can show up to either Slack or Zoom. Same with any of these special interest groups. They have Slack channels, they have Zoom meetings. yes, you can show up and you don't have to say anything. You can keep yourself muted. You can have your video off. You can introduce yourself in chat. You can say that you're just here to observe. I did that for 3 months. I did nothing but just observe for 3 months before I went in. So that is totally cool. So that's my microphone is observing is totally cool. So you can either take the strategy of PR, commit today and commit often, or take the strategy of be a fly on the wall. So that is it for us for April. If you're a contributor out there that has been pushing code, docs, policy, community, anything related to upstream, and you would love to help us out and mentor other contributors, please, we have several programs that do this and more. Reach out to us in Contributor Experience if you'd like to donate some time. And for everybody who is listening, this is the first Monday of every month now at 8:30 p.m. Pacific, I think 3:30 p.m. UTC, if my math is right. And that's all she wrote for today. See you when we see you. Bye, y'all. Thanks, Allison, for streaming for us. See you soon.
Bye, everyone.
Okay, now what happens? Did we just leave?
I was thinking, does the live end?